Hello and welcome back to Supercar Secrets, brought to you by supercarsmonaco.com. And once again, we're heading off to the Aladdin's Cave workshop of our classic car expert, Ian Tyrrell. And as you can see, sitting in front of a very special, very attractive Lamborghini Espada. So Ian, tell us a little bit about the story of this other beautiful, iconic Lamborghini in the range from that era.
Well, it's an interesting one. It was styled by Marcello Gandini, as a lot of Lamborghinis were. He designed the Miura, the Countach, all the sort of halo out there exotic cars. But the Espada for years has sort of been the underdog, really. People haven't quite got the Espada. They were quite popular in period. They made 1,200 of them in the space of 10 years. And it was, at the time, the world's fastest four-seater. Paul McCartney had one, new, which he used to drive around in. And they were more expensive than a Miura when they were new. But time hasn't been particularly kind to them until the last few years. I mean, you could pick them up for next to nothing Espadas because they were a very, very complicated, expensive to run, expensive to look after car, and people didn't know quite what to do with them. It was almost fear of the unknown in a way, really.
That's interesting. Funnily enough, I took my little Fiat 500 into a garage near Antibes for a service last year, and leaning against the wall in this tiny little village garage was this enormous bonnet. And I asked the garage owner what the bonnet came off of. He sort of pointed to a dust sheet in the corner, and underneath that dust sheet was a Lamborghini Espada. And it's obviously his pension fund that he was gradually restoring. So I'm guessing he didn't pay too much for that one.
I'm sure he didn't, no.
So tell me about the model history. I mean, I think, again, like several Lamborghinis, it had quite a long life and went through several different iterations.
Yes. Well, it came out of a concept car called the Marzal, which was a one-off. They only made one. It was a very big car, but there was so much cabin space in it that they had to chop the Lamborghini V12 engine in half to make room for the engine. So it ended up as a 2-litre 6-cylinder engine, pushing a big, heavy car. As you can imagine, that wouldn't really have been a commercial success, but it was just a prototype. And the Marzal had very big glass areas here. The roof was glass. Even the lower panels on the door were glass as well. And it famously drove around the Prince Rainier and Princess Grace at the time, drove around, I think it was the 1967, might be 66, Monaco Grand Prix opening sequence before the race sort of started. They drove around in this Marzal. So it was a working car. But what they decided to do was ratchet the extreme styling bit a notch or two, and put the engine in the front, make it back into the proper V12, and style this amazing, spacious, it is a full four-seater, amazingly enough, spacious cabin, and turn it into a high speed at the time, continent-crushing GT for 4 in their luggage, really.
Wow, and so very much a unique proposition at the time, I guess. So when did the actual Espada as we know it come out, and what was the kind of specification of that original model?
Well, the Espada, in terms of sort of iterations, you touched on, you know, its progress, and it was in production for almost exactly 10 years. But it changed remarkably little in that time, really, remarkably little. It went through 3 series, 1, 2, and 3. The Series 1 were the very first cars with a sort of very out there hexagonal style dashboard. And the Series 2 cars were a more refined sort of version with the edges rounded off and things like that. They started to make air conditioning standard on them because it got very hot in there with all that glass. And the Series 2s had the lovely, most of them had the lovely Miura knock-on wheels, the sort of iconic design of the Miura wheel. And then the Series 3 became a more civilized version, which came out in 73, early 73. It had a more sort of safety-orientated wraparound dashboard. It had the more flat wheels, which we can see here from the Urama, same wheel, and they just added a bit more soundproofing and things like that. But it changed remarkably little over its life, the Espada, really, remarkably little.
And was it impacted in terms of, obviously, by the time that Series 3 came out, we were into the fuel crisis, and cars with much more kind of fuel equipment on them, and even big bumpers for American standards and things. Did the Espada get impacted by those developments?
Not as much as you might think. A lot of cars did take a hit in the fuel crisis, for sure. The E-Type V12 Jaguar, of course, was one of them. They couldn't give them away at the time. But the Espada, demand for the Espada continued in a sustained manner because the concept was so right. And I repeat, it was the fastest four-seater that money could buy. And Lamborghini started to offer an automatic transmission option, which there was reasonable uptake on. That was sort of 1974 onwards. It didn't suit the sort of highly strung V12 terribly well. It wasn't torquey like a big American V8, but nevertheless they sold them, and the sales of the Espada really were sustained. Even in 1978 they were still selling them.
Wow. So what again, as we've seen from other cars, certain models, certain series become more attractive to collectors. So what's the story from the Espada's viewpoint as to which ones are most sought after and which ones are fetching the highest prices in?
There's not a huge disparity in prices and values. The Series 1 cars with the sort of quirky Marcello Gandini hexagonal style dashboard and things, and the Mura wheels, they tend to be the most valuable now, but they only made them for a year or so, just over a year, really, in production terms. They are the most valuable. And if you want to put a price on those, a Series 1 Espada in very good condition, you've got to be talking north of £200,000, to 225, 230,000 euros. For a restored car, that's where they start. But for the Series 2 and Series 3, as I say, people prefer the Mura wheels. But the other thing is the Series 3 had power steering on it as well. Apart from the very first cars, they had power steering as standard, and that made a big difference to them, actually, in terms of user friendliness. There's no such thing now as a cheap Espada. Any restored Espada is going to be, properly restored, is going to be well north of £200,000.
Okay, and this one that you've got sitting behind you there, tell me about that car's story and the condition it's in, and then we can perhaps have a look at some of the things to watch out for if you're buying an Espada.
Yeah, this is a UK supplied car. It's a UK right-hand drive car. We've actually got 5 Espadas in the workshop, would you believe, at the moment. But some of them are left-hand drive and some are right. But this is a right-hand drive car. It's been repainted, as almost all Espadas have. But the colour is slightly, marginally different to the colour it started life as. It was more of a maroon metallic. Rosso Granada was the original colour. I describe this as the nail varnish Espada, rather disrespectfully. It's a bit of a Marmite car anyway. You either love or hate them. And the colour polarizes people even more. I don't mind that. I like a bit of mischief, really. That's what these cars are about. If you want to be boring, go and buy something else. But this car's done 34,000 miles from new. It's never had major restoration because it's always been kept on top of. So it's a really up and running car. It drives beautifully. I've driven this on, for my sins, I'm technical officer at the Lamborghini Club UK. I've driven this on Lamborghini Club events and led the charge with all sorts of sort of more modern Lamborghinis. And we've stopped and they've said, I don't think I quite believe what I've just seen. You driving in a very spirited way in a very large and very old car. And we're having trouble keeping up with you in our modern Huracans and Gallardos and things. I mean, it still goes very well, So yeah, that's the history. It is a Series 3 with the wraparound dashboard. It's a manual. And it's got the power steering. So I think it's one of the nicest specifications, really.
Well, perhaps we can take a closer look. Could we have a look inside at the interior?
The interior was leather, as standard on the later Espadas like this. So this is the original interior from 1973. You've got this amazing sort of almost aviation-esque wraparound dashboard, which the Series 3 cars have, which I think looks fabulous, actually, and very much of its era. But if you just have a look in the back, you know, there's a surprising amount of room, actually, really.
You could get an adult in there, couldn't you, behind those front seats?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, and what sort of speed can I cruise at this on the German Autobahn?
Well, these have I mean, it's the same engine as the Miura and the Countach, only very slightly detuned. So it's still Italian horsepower, which is possibly has a little VAT added on somewhere, but it's still a powerful 4-litre V12. It's supposed to be 350 brake horsepower. It probably is that on a good day, but the maximum speed in period was recorded by independent magazines at 155 miles an hour, and it feels very sure-footed on the road. It really does. I mean, if you given the conditions, you could cruise at 120 miles an hour in this still, very comfortably.
Okay, so what should we be looking out for if we want to buy an Espada, and what are the sort of weak spots or the expensive bits that would cost us a lot if we had to fix them?
The big thing with them is rust. It's rust. Like all Italian cars of the 60s and 70s, it's a monocoque construction, so it hasn't got a separate chassis underneath. So it's sheet metal that holds the whole thing together, and nothing wrong with that. You know, that's how just about all modern cars are made. But the problem is you have lots of box sections, cavities, areas where moisture can get in and not so easily get out. Recipe for disaster. And again, I know stories of Espadas in period. After 2 or 3 years, they needed repairs to the bodywork because of rust. It's the big problem with them. But these days, it's all doable. You can make panels for them. You know, things have moved on. But that's the big thing to watch when you're buying them, really. History is very important, actually, because they were worth so little at some stages in their life. It's much better to buy a car such as this one that's been consistently looked after throughout its life, rather than something that was, dare I say it, almost a chicken coop and been brought back from the dead, really. You know, this has been a consistently looked after car all its life. And you can tell it's still a really sharp looking car, but I have seen some horrors with them over the years, I have to say.
And are there still some of those horrors around on the market? Has everything been accounted for and restored, or are there still some heaps out there?
The pendulum is swinging towards good cars again that have had money spent on them, but there are still some horrors out there. Yes, yeah.
And from what you said in the introduction, this is one of those cars where perhaps it's now, after a period in the doldrums, on something of an upward curve in terms of values?
Yes, I would say so. They're being recognised for the landmark car that they were and are, really. As I've already alluded to, you either like the styling of them or you don't. You either get the Espada or you don't. I mean, in terms of packaging, it's a fantastic feat, really, because it's a full 4-seater. You've got the room in the back here for your luggage. I'll just open it up and show you. You know, you can fit a respectable amount of luggage in there. The fuel tanks are here at the side. The spare wheel is underneath. The battery is here. I mean, it's a packaging work of genius, really. There is not much spare space on an Espada. So it is an eminently usable classic, really.
Okay, now we talked about the rust and bodywork. Let's assume that that's okay, but I've also seen videos of you carefully tuning Lamborghini engines. It doesn't look like something that, you know, you'd want to let an amateur loose on. So what are they like from a mechanical perspective?
Yeah, the engines aren't cheap to rebuild on them, and again, that's something that it needs somebody who knows their way around them to give them a pre-purchase inspection. That's the key. You know, it's got to have been checked over and looked at. Check the compressions in the engine are okay, because, oh goodness me, you can easily be into £30,000 plus for an engine rebuild on an Espada. So yeah,
it's a biggie. And I know obviously one of the things you spend a lot of your time doing is going around looking at cars on behalf of potential buyers. So I guess you would, you know, be taking this kind of mental checklist with you when you look over a car to decide whether it's worth acquiring or not.
Precisely. Yeah.
So Ian, let's just assume that I'm the potential buyer. I've asked you as my expert to come and look over this particular Espada.
Yeah.
You know, what would your feedback to me on this particular car be?
Buy it would be my feedback. You've got to bear in mind, they're not a cheap car to restore. I've seen the vast majority of Espadas that I've seen over the last 35 years that I've been working on them aren't in as good condition as this. This is a very well preserved car, so it hasn't had a massive amount of money spent on it trying to make it back into a nice car, and therefore somebody's trying to recoup huge investment. This has always been a nice car. It's always been looked after. Therefore, it's not on the market at £200,000 or anywhere near it. So I think it's something of a bargain.
Okay, well, obviously, you know, the car is available. So if you are interested, just get in touch with us through the supercarsmonaco.com site, and we'll have a conversation with Ian about this particular nail varnish Espada. Thanks very much for joining us, Ian, and we'll see you again soon for another episode of Supercar Secrets.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thanks.